Welcome to the Wooden Pulpit Podcast, a podcast ministry of the Holston Primitive Baptist Universalist Church located here in Rogersville, Tennessee. Our purpose, of course, is to promote dialogue and encourage meaningful conversations that can create space for church leaders in various settings to exchange ideas and share challenges. Today, we're blessed to have Miano with us. Michael is an especially gifted speaker, apologist, and director of the Power of Preterism Network, along with being pastor of the Blue Point Bible Church in Long Island, New York. He'll be one of the speakers at our upcoming Rethinking the Resurrection conference in March, on March 26th and 27th. And we're thankful to have him today and look forward to him being with us here at Holston Church in March. Welcome to the Wooden Pulpit, Michael.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you. I appreciate the time to get into some discussion tonight as a sort of teaser. And of course, I'm looking forward to joining with you all there in Rogersville in March.
Thank you so much. I have immensely enjoyed our time together last week and on the podcast with you and being able to talk about leadership and church. And these are some issues that are dear to my own heart because I think oftentimes if you get the wrong sort of leadership, people can become they can become rooted really in an unhealthy environment or relationship that doesn't lead them to really be more fully dependent on God, but can become fully dependent on someone who has perhaps not their best interest at heart. So we'll look at some of that today while we're here together. And I really look forward to that in our conversation. First, though, I would really like to maybe have you tell us about your journey into faith and your calling to the ministry, if you wouldn't mind.
Amen. Well, thank you. And by the way, I want to say thank you for the nice things that you said. Of course, we give all glory to God for any good that you see from me, and I'll take credit for the bad. Okay. So, that being said, my story really starts out with me saying this. It's Tuesday. I mark out Testimony Tuesday every week of my life, where I take the opportunity to evaluate my life and see where God has built me up. We say these beautiful Christian sayings, such as, God has given everything to me pertaining to life and godliness. God has always been there, right? We say these things. And today, as I began to, obviously looking forward to joining with you here, I really began to think this through. I can actually say I woke up thinking about it. And, my life, at every turn, I've had if I really do that examination, it's almost as though God was waving to me every moment, good, bad, ugly, however you look at it. So to quickly introduce myself, so I was born here on Long Island, and I was born into, I guess what you would say, a middle-class family. And my mother and my father, I don't know how serious they were when I was younger, as I didn't have that relationship growing up. However, unfortunately, when I was about 5 years old, my mother got addicted to drugs, and that kind of directed the next, let's say, 2 decades of my life, where due to being shuffled around to different family members and not really having a lot of family support or leadership, which again, we're going to get in on here, not really having that, I sought it out. Where can I find brotherhood? Where can I find identity? Where can I find my family? And obviously, a little bit of my testimony, this led me to getting involved in street life, gang life. And if you meet me, you understand I have tattoos kind of all over. So, that it's sort of reflected right there when you see me. And I joined this gang, and that pretty much led my life from 13 years old up until about 23. And I say that because I know the disadvantage of bad leadership. I know what can happen when you have somebody helping guide your life, influencing your life, if you will, in ways that can be destructive to you as you progress. And while, as I said, I look at my life and I see, even from the moments of my mother's struggle, even, the moments where I felt isolated and lonely, God was there. He was using these moments, I refer to them as the iron furnace. He was using them to build me up, to be who he wanted me to be. And so to make a long story short, I kind of navigated that lifestyle, got in a lot of trouble in my younger years. I wound up in a New York State prison system. And again, talking about God waving at me constantly. One thing was God blessed me with this desire and this love for reading. My younger years, the people would joke, they'd say he's the gang member that reads books. And, I would go, prison wasn't that problematic to me because it was actually quiet time where I could read a book. And thanks be to God that when I ended up in the prison system, I did exactly that. I did a lot of reading, my worldview expanded. And I believe, obviously, as I find myself today serving in ministry, God utilized all of that to build me up and lead me to him. So my testimony obviously begins, that is my testimony. God's been there. However, in the prison system, I began doing some reading and started to seriously look into, what it might be that I believe. I call that seeking, just seeking something outside of myself. My gang identity began to wane. I began to see that this really didn't seem to be what I was going for. Again, we talk about leadership. I began to see this doesn't seem like where I was being led in the first place. Maybe that's where our first key of identifying bad leadership is saying, well, this isn't where the road was starting out. We were on one path. Now all of a sudden we're going this way. And so in my life, that the inconsistency of my gang life began to challenge me to look for other things. And being that I grew up here on Long Island, it's a nominal Catholic faith here across the island. Average person will tell you they're Catholic. So I had somewhat of an influence of the Christian faith. I've been to church here and there when I was younger, different family members being involved in the church. However, no stable life there in the church. So in prison, I read a lot of books. I navigated through a couple different religious understandings. The most interesting was mythology, because you kind of make it whatever you want, as that's exactly what it is. They made it up. And I navigated Eastern religions a little bit. Surely no scholar, a 20-year-old young man that felt that he knew everything. Now I'm just a 37-year-old man that feels like he knows everything. But again, so, there I was in those years, just trying to navigate and gain an understanding of history. And that was a blessing to me. And I ended up studying Islam. And to make a long story short, Islam led me to Christ. Islam, navigating through historical texts and trying to put together timelines. And I'll actually get in on that when we talk a little bit about leadership, why I believe help outlining understandings and helping people think through, not necessarily giving them the answers, but helping them think through different things. And I've been blessed in my life that at each turn, whether it was gang life, whether it was studying religions, Islam, or coming into Christianity, God was faithful in putting someone there that would help guide me and, encourage my thought. And so I became a Christian in prison in 2005. And I did not become the Christian that would be content with sitting in the pew. The minute I was led to the faith, they knew, oh boy, he's going to be an interesting young man. And I went out to the prison yard and would be arguing with Muslims about different things. And to sum up my call to ministry, obviously I came home from prison in 2006, and everybody that was around me was like, you need to go to school. You need to get involved in something, get involved in an internship, do something. It'll save your life and it'll be a blessing to many. And so to sum all of that up, I came home from prison and I just endeavored to walk worthy of what I've come to see and what I've come to understand. As you know, I wrote a book called Freaked Out by the New Covenant, and that's the way I explain it. I was freaked out, and I've never been able to turn back to what I was. And thanks be to God. And obviously, here I serve at Blue Point. I've been here for 9 years, and the beauty in that and the simplicity of it is this: there were a group of people that have seen me speaking and said, "That man is going to be the man that's going to inspire, teach, and encourage our congregation to continue our mission." And again, I've been here for 8 years, and God has continued to show Himself faithful.
Well, that was one thing I was going to ask. Your time at Blue Point as the pastor, how's that really shaped your perspectives, or has it changed any of your thoughts on maybe what you thought leadership and pastoring was going to be all about?
So, and I'm sure you've heard me say this before, I've been discipled by Blue Point Bible Church. A young man coming here to this congregation. And again, there's many here that look to me, I can show you time statements. You want to get brought to a book in the Bible and you want me to help you understand context. I'll find resources with you. I'll dig with you. Yes. I came here and they thought this man will teach us. This congregation taught me. They blessed my life, a young man that they said, let's encourage him. Let's, make sure that he doesn't become conceited, as we see there in 1 Timothy 3, You don't want to take a young man and encourage him to become arrogant. However, they molded me, they discipled me, they challenged me. And if I may just share a short quip in that regard, a couple of years ago, well, when I first came here, matter of fact, when I first interviewed for the call to be here at this congregation, they had asked me about sovereign grace, Calvinism, and my response to them was, "Well, I've never read anything by John Calvin, so I don't know if I could call myself a Calvinist, a very weak one at that." And they had enough grace to say, "Well, do you believe that God is the one that has led you to come to understand him, that he's always been there and it's been you that was lost?" And I said, "Yes, amen." And they said, "Okay, well, study John Calvin," and then they encouraged me to come here. And I studied the writings, and I was able to teach Blue Point Calvinism, even to the other day, joking with someone saying, "I came here and they taught me Calvinism, and then now I believe I'm teaching them Calvinism." Strange stuff. So, and then if I may just add one other short story there. A couple of years later, probably about 4 years ago, I had this moment where I read a book about baptism, water baptism, and I began to just, say, well, what if water baptism is something that we need to be maybe a bit more particular about and a bit more, placing emphasis upon it, and not fully understanding how that counteracted the sovereign grace that I've come to understand now. I went down this road where I had a couple friends baptized. I baptized some people, right there on the spot to make sure, let's make sure we seal the deal.
Yeah.
And Blue Point was patient with me. They were patient. They let me go through that. They let me navigate that. And I did not come out agreeing with that, actually, probably more strongly against it than I was then. But they were patient and they discipled me. So hopefully those are two examples of how this church was able to take a young man who is zealous for the Lord and encourage me and teach me. And again, I'm the youngest member of Blue Point Bible Church by many times 20 years. So, again, it's just a blessing to serve here and to have these people that would be willing to build up my life the way that they have.
Well, I think that is the mark of leadership, is to be teachable, to be reflective, and to be someone that can respond to criticism that's constructive, of course, in a way that it doesn't destroy you. I mean, it may put you aback, it does all of us at times. Maybe it's like what I think of was the proverb, "The wounds of a friend are better than the kisses of an enemy." So I've had those experiences before, and they've really been healthy. Not always had, positive experiences from some churches that I've served, but I think those are good ones that you can trust someone and value what they have to say and value their wisdom. So I think that's good. Now, this brings up a good point. I know I've struggled with this for several years, and I don't know, maybe if you have, or maybe you've given a lot of thought to this, but it's a question I've often wondered about is, what's the difference between a scholar and a pastor, or is there a difference between them?
That is a good, that's a good question. I recently had to challenge some people about the word scholar. What exactly do we refer to as a scholar? Is it somebody that has a PhD? Is it someone, in that regard? I'm not sure. However, I read a book recently that I think may build on top of that, and it's called The Pastor Theologian. I'm forgetting the name of the author right now. However, that book helped me gain a healthy understanding of the pastor serving as a scholar, if you will, serving as the theologian. And I think that's not every pastor needs to serve in that capacity, but I think we need to open the door for many pastors that have that calling to serve in that capacity.
Yeah, I've wondered about that. I can't remember. Maybe it was that D.A. Carson, you think, or it sounds like Carson, but it may not.
It wasn't a very popular name. D.A. Carson's more of a popular name. This was somebody that a book that's probably just sitting on a bookshelf somewhere that nobody saw the true value in, and I did.
Well, sometimes you never know. That's why I've bought books that may seem to come from a completely different angle or perspective, but you find gold in some places if you dig, and I've found that in some and places you wouldn't imagine there to be something of value. But I've wondered about that because I know back in the day when I was around a lot of very conservative Presbyterians, I believe it was Dr. R.J. Rushdoony. He maybe have made that point that that's what he thought happened in the Reformation, that theologians got back into the pulpits and started looking at these, worldview issues, and that may have been needed at that time. Apparently, it was, to kind of bring the church back to where they were looking at all of life. I do really value Calvin's thoughts on the fact that all of life is an act of worship. I treasure that. I really take that serious, and that's why here at our church, when we talk about worship, we don't talk about coming here and telling God how great He is. God knows how great He is, and so worship and church for us is more about connecting to each other and trying to be encouraging. So I guess that leads us into, one question I had before we get into this, but kind of leads us into this discussion is, what would be, I guess, how would you describe a healthy church?
So I would obviously say a place where you encourage thinking. Here at Blue Point, our motto, we make it, a thinking faith. We believe the church, as it says in Ephesians 3:10, the church has been given to make known the manifold wisdom of God. So we believe that we're a place that should be a safe place for people to actually think. And of course, as I shared my testimony, that I'm sure that my style of ministry here at the church definitely comes from my testimony and the way that I've seen people build me up. However, I must say, Blue Point, prior to me serving here, they've been a congregation where the pastors prior to me, they did everything they could to foster a mentality where every mind is valuable. There's no ranks. There's no, it's not an elder-led congregation here at Blue Point. We're a corporate-led, corporate vote church. Every mind plays a part, and there's a blessing. That many people think there's a burden in that, because sometimes it can be hard to get things done when every person has a vote at the table. However, there's a blessing that it causes all of us to take a step back and to say, well, I have this one vote, so to speak, and do I know what I'm saying? So I think, again, the healthy church corporate vote model, I think, is beautiful. I think encouraging thinking is probably the key. Giving liberty to different people, and I know we share that desire there. That we want to encourage people. Just as I said, all right, well, you're going down this road to water baptism. Some people might refer to that as strange. Here, they did think that was strange, but they encouraged it nonetheless. And not saying they just said, okay, believe whatever you want. Obviously, there were people saying, well, what about this verse? What about this concept? However, they let me journey on my own, take their information. So that would probably be first and foremost. I think a healthy leadership. And if I may say, when I say healthy leadership, I think there's 4 parts to healthy leadership. There's identifying what leadership is. There's obviously identifying who has leadership qualities. There's educating those that have leadership qualities so that they can build themselves up to be leaders. And then there's review, because again, let's face it, our leaders, you don't get to a point and all of a sudden you have it all figured out and that's it. And that's where I think people go wrong in leadership, where we're not encouraging our leaders, and we're not even developing an ethic where we're saying, examine yourself. Yeah. So for me, I guess that would be some of the things: healthy leadership, encouraging thinking in your congregation, allowing every person to be valued and be heard. I think those are some important things with healthy churches.
I think that's good. I think in having this discussion, and oftentimes in learning, it's good to have a contrast. So one thing I was thinking about, it's been a while back, but here at our church, we looked at the BOT model, which is a psychological model of the difference between like a constructive or a destructive type of environment when it comes to people together, whether it's church or political or just your local community, Ruritan, or whatever you're a part of. As I think we've talked before, cults fascinate me because I feel like you don't really have to be in a cult. We often think of Scientology, or I know we would have a guy come from the Southern Baptist Convention at the church that I grew up. He would come like once every few months, and he would do a series of lessons about cults, and he would always talk about Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, or, he'd always name off the obvious weirdos, as he would, it's as if Southern Baptists or Methodists or Presbyterians aren't weird. But he named off this whole list of other people. But as I've come out of a lot of the church settings I was in, it makes me think, because, and not that I'm trying to call these people cults, but there's cult-like tendencies in places where they cut you off from the rest of Christian history. I've just seen it too many times, and people become dependent on a pastor to be the only source of information when it comes to theological enrichment or encouragement. And I just don't know. I don't know how that's any different than Scientology or Mormons or whatever brand. Of course, I don't think necessarily all those are negative contexts. I've had some really good friends that come from a lot of different places, a lot of different churches that are considered weird by the mainstream. But the BOP model talks about four major components. First, of course, is behavior control, and that's imposing rigid rules and regulations. Rewards and punishments are used to modify behavior. Thoughts, feelings, and activities are reported to superiors. So, of course, tattling is usually encouraged in those environments. Financial exploitation, dependency, and different types of manipulation are a part of a cult-like setting. Then you've got information control, where you keep members busy so they don't have time to think and investigate anything. I know oftentimes when I hear guys that came out of the Church of Scientology will say often, they're discouraged to get on the internet and look at things for themselves. And of course, again, we've talked about that before. We encourage our congregations to think, to read widely, look at all these developments through Christian history. And then, of course, information control comes with a reporting system, members reporting on other members. I remember growing up in environments like that where if, it was a big thing where I lived that if women didn't wear a dress all the time, or, if they had makeup on, then they were hussies, or they were just out gallivanting around. And so people would tell on those that they'd see out, or it was a huge deal at one time here in the area that I was raised, that if a gas station sold liquor or beer, you just you weren't supposed to go in there, that was being part of the world. And I have had that experience of somebody at a church tattling on a preacher that I knew, just whispering it in my ear as if it was something dastardly that was going on. So it's these cult-like tendencies that fascinate me. And then, of course, there's thought control. It's us versus them. I guess this is why, especially, Michael, I really enjoy our conversations, because I see this sometimes. This is the one part of the preterist movement that I don't like. And, people can have their opinions on it, but I don't like the whole notion of it's us versus them constantly, because it sets up this adversarial role for futurists. And I know I don't agree with futurism. I think it's very pessimistic. I think it's defeatist. It's this escapist mentality. It's like, we don't need to take responsibility for the present because God's going to come. There's no use in trying to polish brass on the Titanic is kind of embedded in futurism. But if it's always us versus them, and that can be in any realm, but I've seen it in churches that have the same signs on their door, and they might be 2 miles from each other, especially in the South. It's like, it's our group against their group. And then labeling other belief systems as evil. Members all agree that their doctrine is the only way. And critical questions, doubts about doctrine or leaders or policies are not tolerated. So, it's a always keeping people on eggshells about asking questions or being critical or doubting somebody. And lastly, emotional control, because a lot of this does instill fear, because people have a fear of losing their salvation or their spiritual freedom. They have a fear of the outside world. I know some people that would maybe have a conversation that seems uncomfortable, just talking about maybe the differences between a Presbyterian and a Methodist. And I've witnessed people get just really uncomfortable with that because it was so outside of their world that it caused them some real anxiety. Or if you tell them you're reading a book about the Tanakh, like it's such a weird thing that and you can tell it's people that's never been exposed to any sort of broader worldview. So it really does limit them in so many ways. And then, of course, it's fear of leaving the church or leaving the group because you'll be shunned, you'll be, ostracized. So, and it's unhealthy because you got all these emotional highs and lows and, praise and love bombing. And one minute people love you and the next minute they hate you. And then of course you're excommunicated, so there's unhealthy things that take place in situations like this, environments like that. And I know that's not what, of course, we try to advocate. And from just hearing in your conversation, I know you feel the same. What are some things you think we can do to combat that, or how would you say, how do you personally try to model a supportive or encouraging environment, just like in your personal relationships and as a pastor? What are some things you do that you would like to share with us?
Man, I appreciate those thoughts. Those are some good thoughts that you said there. One thing I would say very simply is narcissism runs deep. And when we become Christians, it doesn't get lost on us. So that's why I believe the Apostle Paul is emphatic quite a few places in the New Testament to examine ourselves. Examine yourself to see if you're in the faith. Examine yourself to see if you're possessing and growing, or if you're kind of stagnant. You just believe you're right because you're right. That's. I think that would be the first thing I would say there. If I may, I'll share some. I'm a preacher, so I guess I'll share some stories. I guess that's the way that you're supposed to do this. So, if I may, I'll say this. When I studied Islam, for example, the first thing that turned me away from the Islamic understanding was the fact that they were not welcoming my questions. I just had a simple question: are there any historical writings from the time of Muhammad outside of the Quran that might validate what Jesus was saying or might validate what the Christians were saying? And I asked questions like that, and I was told, don't ask those questions. Don't go near the feathers in the yard and talk about that. So for me, right away, that mentality of you can't ask questions, you can't think outside the box. I didn't need to be a Christian to see the problem with that. And hopefully we would see right away that if you're a part of a community that's telling you, you're not allowed to bring up a question, well, there's something unhealthy going on there. Somebody's unsure of themselves, and it might very well be your leader. So now coming into Christianity, as I've studied now, I must say the man that led me to Christ, gracious, such a gracious man. I would have all these moments, everything from, well, what about forgiveness? I would wrestle with forgiveness when I first became a Christian because I was in prison and I had people that testified against me to put me in prison, and I had to go home eventually. Let's face reality here. So being that I was truly challenging my worldview and saying, well, what am I going to do when I go home? I mean, this has to have some real orthopraxis, if you will. So, what is going to be my worldview when I get home? And this man was patient with me and would encourage me. And sometimes, sometimes the answer is relax. There is no answer, Mike. Think about it. Think about this young man that's a gang member that becomes a Christian. I'm saying, I don't know if I forgive this guy. I don't know if I have real forgiveness in my heart. Paul, tell me, how do I have forgiveness in my heart? How do I forgive? And he's like, Mike, just trust God and relax. So one thing I think that I want to mark out there is not always having the answer. Sometimes there is no answer. And it's, what? I want to encourage you, dig for the answers, search yourself, build yourself up. So finally, the third thing I'll bring up in that regard would be when I served as an intern, again, I've served in quite a few different ministries and different denominations. When I was this zealous, on fire former gang member, so people were taking me into different ministries. And in a short span of about 3 years, I served in about 4 different ministries in rather large campuses. And obviously, there you see the ego, you see the narcissism on, totally all the way to, and I don't want to pick on anyone here, however, all the way to the point where, this is where I want the stool, where you see those X's. That's where you put the stool chair, and that's it. So what you want to do in those environments, though, is you want to make sure that, you're encouraging questions, you're encouraging people, and you marked it out rather well when you were talking about the cults. For example, something that really spoke to me, well, there's quite a few things, and I'll say this, and then I'll just say one other thing. The one thing that really spoke to me was where you'll get all this praise, right? One day I'm Mike Miano. You need to study with Mike Miano. That man knows the Bible, is studying the Bible.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, Mike Miano is a heretic. You can't study with him. You should go nowhere near that man. Don't even talk to him if you see him in public. And I'm like, where's the middle ground here? There has to be a middle ground.
Exactly.
Hey, maybe Mike Miano is navigating into some strange stuff, and you want to be cautious. Listen to him, but search the scriptures. See if what this man's saying. What about that mentality? What about come up alongside your brother that's struggling and comfort him and encourage him? Don't follow him into everything that he's doing, but be like Jesus. So I say that because many of the things that you listed about cults are actually things that Jesus spoke against. You mentioned behavior control. All through the New Testament, this is something that I lean in on a lot here at the church. All through the New Testament, there's Christian liberty. There's Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8. These are texts that are saying we are not to be a community that has behavior modification as our standard. That's not how we know you're a Christian, because you do this or don't do this. But, again, that's how cults are built. I thought of, if I may just mention a couple of the other things you said, thoughts and feelings and activities constantly being reported. Again, we know that's gossip. That's what that pretty much amounts to. And again, I thought of one thing that I thought was interesting in that regard. Remember when Jesus's disciples come back to him? Because they had that mentality. They had that cult-like mentality. They come back, they say, hey, John's disciples, you won't believe what these guys are doing. They're not a part of us. They're over there doing that. And what does Jesus say? If they're working with us, if they're not, for me, that is Jesus literally saying, don't be like a cult. Don't have that mentality. They're doing good too. Appreciate the difference and encourage what they're doing. So, again, I think there's a lot of what you said to chew on and to take to heart if we want to really see healthy communities.
Yeah, I think so. That's what had kind of led me into questioning about, one question I thought about today. I was thinking about this at work when I was thinking about our conversation this evening, and I wrote it down just so I wouldn't forget, and worded it just in a way that I think is my genuine question. And I'm not looking for an answer. I think it's something that we can be thinking about. But can we genuinely promote a healthy theological interpretation apart from a supportive or healthy church community? Because you see it way too many times. And I had, I've seen it a lot, but I remember a really good friend of mine who was a football coach of mine in high school. He had been through a lot of different changes in his life and went through a lot of different, especially with churches and theology. He's a very good person. He and his wife are just top-notch people, especially in this community, well thought of. But I remember he came to a meeting that we had at a local place where a few of us were getting together before we had the church. And I'd presented something about the preterist interpretation or the framework. I didn't get a ton of it, but enough to where it really whet his appetite. And then he asked me about it, and I kind of explained a little bit, and I gave him some resources. Now, my friend is one. He's a football coach. He gets focused in, and he's deadly. So he gets hyper focused, and it's just what makes him so good. What he's done over the years, but he looked at a lot of things, of course, and again, I love Don Preston. I think he's very, very impressive, and that just really put Rick on put my friend on a very solid foundation with preterism, loving everything that that Don and William and others were presenting online, and it was wonderful. But then he went into some of the chat rooms or some of the Facebook groups of preterists, and he came to my house one day just flabbergasted and exhausted. He said, "What is it with these people?" I said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Boy, they're ready to just cut your nose off as soon as you mention anything." And I just said, "Well, I think what it is, a lot of them aren't really tied to a healthy community anywhere. They've become so isolated with their theological positions." And I know sometimes it can isolate you away because lots of churches do not want to entertain rival theologies, and that's tends to be what they see. I'm sympathetic to a lot of preterists who have become isolated, not by choice, because they've tried to go around to different churches. They may have even not come out with all of their beliefs or all the preterist interpretations, but I'm sure they've been just cut off or told to just if they're going to be a part of that church, just can't mention any of that. So I don't want people to think I'm not supportive of them or empathetic. It's just I would say, though, that if you stay in that isolation, it's really not healthy. So I guess I've wondered about this. Can we have a healthy theological interpretation? Can preterism actually be healthy in isolation? I guess that's why I'm very concerned about this, and would like to see churches that are sympathetic, or maybe like us that are full preterists. I'd like to see us reach out to people and try to offer a helping hand in some way, because I just don't see how we're going to be healthy without community. We're just not made to be isolated from one another. I've said this time and again, you can be the strongest person. You can look like the Rock. You can be very muscular and be a man that can stand against the world. But every story you read about a man trying to stand against the world, after a while can get crushed or is exhausted and needs refreshing and needs renewing. So again, I'm saying a lot, but I've really pondered this question for a long time, and I'm not really looking for specific answers, but I do think it's important that we have these conversations surrounding this. So, I mean, what do you think?
Well, amen. And my brother, I appreciate and I share that sentiment with you. That I believe that if I may say this, whether you're the strong man that eventually will need the community, or you're the weak person that's failing to see the community that you need right now. Because again, I even said this just leaving our worship service on Sunday. I said, well, and I have to say this facetiously, but I mean this. I mean this from my heart. That this week, if anybody decides to go about and tell me about their problems, my first question for them is going to be, did you meet with the church earlier this week? Because again, I think by and large, most people are not, they're experiencing the problems, the frustrations, because they're not finding community. They're not putting themselves in a place of community. So, again, if you're that strong man that one day is going to need that community, or if you're that weak person that for some reason is not taking hold, I want to exhort you, plug in, bring yourself into a community. And, they don't need to believe everything you believe the same. Again, here at Blue Point, if you were to ask, we're a small congregation. If you were to go around the membership, I'm sure you're going to get some little differences of perspective here and there. There's no doubt about that. So, we need to stop making that our and I know you interviewed Daniel Rogers the other day. I appreciate he earlier today had commented on one of my points where I am this guy that I want to create a sort of, top down system. This is what we believe. Boom, boom, boom. And, I get it. I think that's an ideal. That's not necessarily the reality. And Daniel basically said that to me. He kind of jumped in and he said, and this is church in action right here, where he said, I don't know that we'll ever achieve that. I don't know that that is the desire.
Yeah.
And now we might have a little different of a perspective on that. However, that's the goal of the church, to cause each other to relax and maybe say, well, why would you say it that way? And to think. So I meant what I said at the beginning of this program, that I would not be the person I am today if it was not for the local church. And I believe that we really do. I share your understanding there with this movement that we're seeing, the preterist community. All too often, I see myself in discussion where I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying, these people do not gather with a congregation. And again, there's many different ways we can do that. I'm sure you share the same sentiment I do. We're not talking about, going to a church where you put on your favorite tie and, you have to walk in and, kneel before the altar, so to speak. Go to a living room with a group of believers and have a marked out time of saying, we're going to talk about scripture. We're going to share devotions. We're going to pray together, and we're going to see how great God is in our midst. I like what you said there, because God already knows he's great. So let's take the time to truly see the greatness of God in our midst. So again, brother, I agree with you. I think, I really do. And I know, that we're leading in on a conversation with the Power of Preterism Network, hoping to really get a group of people, because as you know, even within the movement, there's a lot of division. So what we're trying to do is do our very best to bring healing to different minds and say, I'll say this, part and parcel of when I gained clarity, part of my healing process is to learn that I'm not always right. And it's the local church that comes up and reminds me of that, supports me in that. And again, I see the value in that every week, whether it's, and I'm not talking theology, I'm talking, I had an incident with somebody last week and I felt frustrated from the situation. What do I do? These are the options that Mike Miano knows. And then all of a sudden, Deacon Brian says, well, what about these 5 options that Mike Miano didn't remember? And that's what the value of the church really is.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of what I was looking at too, as we were discussing this. I know what we're trying to do with the Power of Preterism Network and Preterist Pastors Network. I've seen you. I've seen that you've had a real heart for that for a few years now, and really promoting that. And I like to see some movement there. That's all we can do is have these conversations, and again, do things like maybe where we're trying to promote our conference. We're not trying to, like I said, figure out who's right. I thought about this today too, and this is my management style at work. This is kind of what we do here at our church as well. And I've told my kids this, my sons especially. I've told them this when they think about marriage or being in a long-term relationship. We can either be right or we can be helpful. Some think if they could just prove their point that this should solve everything, but proving points and being right doesn't necessarily give somebody a cup of water or give them a listening ear. One thing I learned, you would think, I've been through counseling training, I've been through college, I've been a pastor, and I didn't really understand my wife until we were in our 30s. Because as a man, I want to solve problems. And it just finally came to a point one day, my wife and I were having a conversation. She said, sometimes I just need you to just listen. Just listen to me. I don't want you to solve my problems. And I learned so much in that moment. It's like, well, years and years of counseling failure and pastoral counseling or interactions I've had, it seemed like in an instant, all that came back to my mind. I'm thinking, yeah, there's times I should have just shut my mouth and not try to get my hands dirty to solve their problems. Sometimes they just want somebody to listen so they can, formulate a way to solve their own problem. So, and I know every situation is different. There are situations where you need to get somebody into a safe environment, like you're talking about. If it's somebody that's on drugs or has addiction problems, or maybe children are in a very dangerous situation, you immediately want to respond in situations like that to get someone in a safe place. But oftentimes in church, we're not necessarily talking about that. We're just wanting to get people to come and experience a healthy environment, and to remind us from time to time what that means. So that's going to be some of what we're going to be doing. I know some things we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks, especially with our lessons at church, will just be things like, embracing teachable moments, like I just talked about, emotional, cognitive, and social development, nurturing people, being adaptable, keeping our word, I think is a big part of, especially leadership. And when you want to invite people from the community to your church, they want to know that you're going to keep your word, and they want to know what you're all about. You need to set expectations and let them know what you're about and what your ministry is. And that's just a few of the things we'll be looking at. And again, I just want to lead us maybe into a couple of things about our upcoming conference, but these are conversations I think that are part and parcel to even what we're doing in our conference. We're going to have Daniel come. He's shared with me a few things he's going to be presenting, which I think is just phenomenal. I don't know if I'll even agree with any of it, but it sounds great to me. It just sounds like an interesting thing. Of course, I love to learn and I love to hear different perspectives. So I'm not inviting people together necessarily to think we have differences, but if we do, that's good, and we can examine those. And of course, Mike, you're going to be with us Saturday evening and speaking to us. Can you give us maybe a taste or a little bit of flavor, maybe of what you're going to be presenting?
Sure. And again, Jonathan, I have to say, I appreciate the way some of the insights you bring out, even just this podcast alone. I want to go back and review some of the great things that you've said. Thank you, brother.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I think that what we need to do is we really need to think together, because what I'm realizing when we talk about, rethinking the resurrection, right? Let's talk about thinking about the resurrection. If you talk to 5 people and you ask them, what do you think about the resurrection? And you listen to what they're saying, they have a nuance and a perspective. They're viewing the resurrection again. And I'm talking about, let's say, Christians that have been informed about the Bible, et cetera. And even preterist Christians, for that matter. We all come into this with, are we thinking about pain? Is that something that is in our, let's face it, there's people in the preterist community that have experienced biological pain, physical pain their entire life. And yet, and I say that to myself. I give myself the chills, to be quite honest. And I'm not a over sentimental type of guy here. But I say that because even myself, I'm a very avid corporate body advocate. I'm firm on it. I believe this is what the scriptures are teaching. More recently, as I've welcomed some conversation and obviously been excited preparing for your conference, I've realized maybe I, being as firm as I am, again, I've defended this in debates, maybe I need to take a step back and consider some other perspectives. What are people really curious about? What are they really wondering, beyond what, all right, so if I say the resurrection of the dead is Jesus, just to make it very simply put, Jesus said, I am the resurrection. So if Jesus is the resurrection, and I say that to somebody, well, you've passed out of death into life when you believed in Jesus, yet this person has been taught their entire life, or still maybe not even taught, but they're concerned. Well, when do I not feel this physical pain that I'm feeling now? What are you saying about that? And I realized, being very transparent, my view sometimes seems as though I'm ignoring that. I'm kind of just going, okay, well, that's your concern. Here we go. We're going to go this way. And that's not fair. That's, that's not Christian. So that's not being a leader, if you will. We talk about leading servants. So to kind of whet your senses of where I'm going with this is, I believe that I have a pretty firm foundation of the biblical narrative. I believe I've come to understand what happened with Adam, how that relates to the resurrection, how the hope of Israel was attached to Adam's death, and then ultimately how that's attached to the New Testament and what's going on. What I think also needs to be said about the writings of the New Testament is we're preterists. Well, I'm a preterist, and I come at this with audience relevance. And that means that not every place in the New Testament where it's talking about resurrection or resurrection of the dead is it making the same points. So I think we need to be cautious, and we need to kind of take our time when we're talking about resurrection. That's why I love the theme, rethinking it. Let's take our time, stop rushing to come up with a doctrine here, a doctrine there, and let's really think it through. So for me, I would offer up the biblical narrative as the apologetic. I believe you have to get a running understanding. I usually challenge people, come up with 5 things you would say about the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Now that you have those 5 things, what is the resurrection? And you see, and then we can go and we can outline each of those 5 things. For example, I had participated in a discussion years ago where we did that. It was a futurist believer and myself, and I said, let's pick 5 ways of outlining the Bible. And what we did was Genesis creation, the Mosaic law, the hope of Israel, the messianic ministry, and the end times. So if you were to take those 5 things and you were to say, okay, how does the resurrection apply to Genesis creation? How does the resurrection apply to the law of Moses? How does resurrection apply to the hope of Israel? So that's where I'm going. Again, I'm a biblical narrative person, and I'm hoping that I will both present something that may be valuable and help people think through what the Bible says. But to be honest with you, brother, I'm hoping to come there and be stumped a bit and be challenged and say, how would I respond to, to some of these concerns, even as I'm getting ready. Of course, I'm already readying myself to say, how would I respond to concerns that don't necessarily come out of the way I would explain the resurrection?
Yeah. No, I think that's good. That's what I'm hoping. Maybe if the ones that get to stick around for the whole weekend, that as we wrap it up, I do want to do kind of a Q&A where people can respond just like yourself or others, may say some things they're going to think about. Not that they've changed their mind, not that they've been proven wrong or anything like that, but maybe some things that help us think more deeply about our own positions, which is good, because I do share your views on the corporate body view. I believe that. I think there's even more to it. I think there's probably, that's what I'm saying. I think there's aspects of even that we've probably not even discovered yet, that are just, it's just so ripe for new and fresh ideas to even come out of those interpretations. That's why I said, I've learned things from perspectives. I've learned things from African-American perspectives, from women, from, from kids. It's amazing, because we get locked in again. I think because I'm a man, I want to solve a problem. So I do scripture like calculus. It has to make sense or it drives me batty. So I think a lot of us come to preterism because we are rationalists in a lot of ways, and it gives us validity to kind of tie together the biblical narrative. One thing I've appreciated about the works of somebody like Walter Brueggemann is that I like his notion of the God that takes all of that. Like when Israel, they've got the chessboard laid out and they think they've got God figured out with, even the extravagant, just amazing way they had everything laid out for temple worship. And then God comes along and throws it all up. and not to be mean, not to be, some sort of jester, but it's just like, if we think we could just contain God in some system, he needs to come along and smash that every now and again. Not that and again, not that you would give up your corporate body view. Like I said, I agree with you. I believe that. I'm learned a lot from Max King and others, and it makes a great deal of sense. But what else are we missing there that maybe it just takes some other fresh approaches? And I thought about, I had a really good friend that's Presbyterian minister in the PCA. We were talking about maybe some of this earlier, but every now and again he would have people come along that may have a PhD in theology or whatever, and so it's like they're trying to outrank one another and come in and try to play those games as if young man, you need to sit down because I'm more credentialed. But one thing I like about my friend is he's always willing to listen to all sorts of voices, regardless of how credentialed. And some of the professors I had in seminary were just some of the most just wonderful people. And they probably think I'm such a heretic now, but I'll never forget some of the wisdom that they had and the approach they had, where they would just be willing, with the complicated and enriching systems of theology that they had, they were still willing to learn and be open to lots of different voices. I think there's some good things in the liberal mainline churches like that. It's just when you abandon all the Christian principles, there's a great deal missing there. So it becomes a ship without a rudder, and it becomes it becomes a painting that just doesn't it's not recognizable anymore. But I think there's some valuable things to learn in listening to these different voices and helping us. So that's what I'm hoping for in this conference. I don't want to put all of our weight into this one conference, but it's very exciting to get these different people together like yourself, who, again, we probably all agree on so much. But I'm hoping through this, because I do have a couple of guys that are going to be with us that they're not going to take the cerebral approach. They take an approach as pastors that they want to connect with people. It's like my friend from North Carolina. He is a very intelligent person, but he comes at it at a different angle that I need. That, he and I often talk, and we exchange ideas, or we talk about our experiences, and I learned so much from him that on the surface you'd think, well, no, I mean, you're far more credentialed, or you've got much more education. But for me, I don't care. I love to get together with those people that I admire, and I feel like I can learn something from. I don't care if they've got a 6th grade education. if they can connect with people and have a certain kind of common sense wisdom about them, I'm very much about learning in those situations as well. And I think this is a real good opportunity for us to maybe do that. So again, very excited about this. Just happy that you're going to be here and present this. And I really am hoping for something, for God to bless our efforts. I know I still believe in God's sovereignty, and don't look that this can be something out of our own efforts by themselves, but I do pray that God would bless us in our efforts in doing this.
Amen. Amen. You said some great things there, and I believe you will. I do want to encourage folks that, of course, you want to be there. It's great to watch on social media and to probably watch these videos, but you want to be there because, as you know, Jonathan, a lot of the conversation is not so much the lectures, but it's what's happening when you're rubbing elbows with people. You're sharing a meal. Your Bible's not open right next to you, and you're not ready for debate. You're just sharing a meal, and you're having a conversation. So I look forward to that. And I believe, again, going back to what we were saying about the local church and the value of the local church, I believe that's what's missing in a lot of the preterist ethos, if you will. The problem in our community is we're not sharing meals with each other. We're not sitting there. Again, it's most of the time it's, I'm at 1 Corinthians 15, verse 56. You ready? And I think, and I've done this, and that I've done this work where I've worked, I've been at the Church of Christ. I drove to the church in Michigan from New York to go there to debate their preacher. And then I hung out for 3 days. Everybody jokes. They're like, you're a glutton for punishment. And my thing is, and you've seen this on my social media, I have a quote that I love. It's a man who, and this is not my own, but a man who is intimate with God is not intimidated by man. And I think, and when I say intimate with God, I mean that in the sense of the body of Christ, that I'm not coming into this to intimidate or to be intimidated, but rather to find that intimacy with one another. And I believe that we can really see that. So again, I want to encourage people to be there at the conference. And also, on the heels of what you had said, I just want to mention the noble Bereans. We bring up that text, right, in Acts chapter 17, verse 11. Everybody always brings it up, and I know I do it a lot myself. I'll bring it up to say, look how noble they were that they searched the scriptures. However, the key to that is not that they searched the scriptures. It's that they listened. They were willing to listen to what Paul said, even if they disagreed. So, the first key, yes, beautiful to search the scriptures. And you and I know we believe in the, searching is necessary. However, let's also mark out the other part that made them noble, was that they were willing to sit there and listen. And, despite, I'm sure they had heard good things about Paul, they had heard bad things. They had heard, his credentials, and they heard his lack of credentials, if you will. And they were still willing to sit there and listen to what he had said and then search the scriptures. So I hope that we'll see that ethic with the conference, and I trust that we will.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Michael. We could just go on and on, because this is I really enjoy these conversations. And we're looking forward to this, our time together. More than anything, that God will bless us to have these new connections with one another, that's what I'm really looking forward to. And I really do think there needs to be some new energy in our efforts in the preterist movement. If nothing else, I'm not so concerned with being some reformer in the preterist movement as much as I am that we are we're pastors together, laboring, encouraging each other, regardless of what culture we come from or what geographical location that we're located. We're God's church. We're Christ's body. And we're here, as you've said so many times, for the healing of the nations. And if we can't encourage each other and give each other healing, how are we going to reach anybody else? So we want to thank Michael today for being with us on the Wooden Pulpit podcast. Thank you for listening. And I invite you to tune in each week. We're going to have more conversations like this. And be watching too for our upcoming lessons and sermons at Holston Primitive Baptist Universalist Church. Again, we're located here in Rogersville, Tennessee. If there's anything we can do to lend you a helping hand, to offer resources, to maybe get you to the right people, who can offer help, we're definitely trying to do that. And we have people ask us from time to time if there are churches located in their areas. And we're hoping that more of that comes up and we could actually have a larger list to offer you. So please keep praying for our efforts. And thank you so much for joining us.